Morning, Alex, and hang on to your hat. I am about to wax philosophical. Recently, I've been thinking a lot about ethical behavior and whether what I do is actually ethical and whether I have any justification for wishing my ethical perspectives on other people. Because I feel like I'm an ethical person, but in the broader scheme of things, is it true that I'm ethical? I'm a public health student, which basically means I can look forward to a job where I tell people what they should and should not be doing based on what I deem to be dangerous for them or good for the environment, such as smoking. People who shouldn't smoke because it's bad for them and because it'll make them sick. So that would be an ethical sort of standpoint where you want to do the most good for somebody. But then there's also the economic standpoint where if you smoke, you get sick. And if you get sick, then you use medical resources. And if you use medical resources, we're using those on something that could have been easily prevented if you just didn't smoke. Or as people who have debilitating diseases that they have absolutely no choice over can't get medical resources because we're spending them all on very, very wealthy smokers who can afford the medical resources. And then that just gets back to the ethics of whether or not somebody should expect to get medical resources just because they're ill if they can't afford them. I mean, those do cost money and does require people to do jobs that somebody has to pay for. So if they can't afford it, then is it ethically reasonable to assume that they should get the resources without having to pay in some form or another? But then that just gets us back to the economic standpoint, where from a national scale, it makes more sense for us to keep all of our citizens healthy. So in time of war, we have more soldiers, or we have more people to produce the weapons that soldiers need, or the equipment that soldiers need. And then again, is war even ethical? This is the dilemma I've been working on for quite some time now, is going through each of my beliefs as far as what I think is good and bad, and whether or not I believe that they're good and bad based on empirical evidence, or whether I just heard somebody talk about how bad they are and I took it at face value that that's the case. Like genetically modified organisms or GMOs, and whether or not we should label GMOs. Well, if you look at what a GMO actually is, a lot of organisms can fall under being a GMO. If you selectively breed your crops, that's a GMO. All dogs these days are GMOs. We've genetically modified them by selective breeding to be whatever it is we want them to be. Now let me just say, we should label genetically engineered organisms. Those are ones where people have actually gone in and inserted different DNA scientifically from dissimilar species, which I don't think is entirely ethical to release those into general consumption without proper testing or letting people know what it is they're ingesting. Now, based on my own sense of morality, I think that's an ethical thing to do, to let people know what it is they're purchasing so that they can choose whether or not they want to support that type of business. But that might not be the same as somebody else's sense of ethics or morality, in that this is a non-issue. For the record, Alex, I'm actually outdoors in a generally public area, which means that people can see me, and somebody probably just heard me say that. You might remember that for a long time I was primarily vegetarian, starting basically after we met up until just this year. For the most part, I didn't eat any meat. I thought that that was an ethical behavior because of the amount of energy that goes into producing beef. And the question is that still ethical? I mean, I know there's a lot of ethics surrounding whether or not meat production is ethical, living off another creature, the killing for our own sustenance. And I don't know whether or not I find that ethical or whether or not I should find that ethical. So anyways, Alex, that's my current dilemma as I wrap up my degree, is whether or not there is a universal right and wrong, and whether or not I'm on the correct side of that right and wrong, and whether or not I'm justified in trying to convince other people to switch sides on what is right and wrong. I don't know if I can justify my meat-eating habits this year, but I do know one thing. I'll see you tomorrow.